When you make an album, does it mean writing songs until you stumble up into a single, or does it mean something else? In other words, are you trying to put something together that's cohesive? I'm not necessarily speaking from a theme standpoint, but a lot of times with prog rock, there is that kind of, sometimes there is an ongoing theme throughout the album. When you approach an album, how do you approach it?
Well, I tend to approach it thematically because I often think that I've done a track and it seemed perfectly good, and but then I'll start to get other ideas that could have been used in that track. Now, when I worked with Chris Squire, when we were doing Squackett, I noticed that what he tended to do was, if somebody had an idea, and we had a 3-man writing team at that time, anyone who had an idea, the song expanded to include that idea. So it would come around again, there'd be a variation, and then there might be a solo or a bit of added detail. The Genesis approach was more thematic. In other words, we would take something and reprise it. The Beatles have given us license to do that, of course. So with Foxtrot, you'll get a recapitulation of theme from the beginning of Supper's Ready. The theme comes back right at the end. So it's that kind of thinking. It's really drawing more from concertos and symphonies and all of that thematic solo sort of stuff. So I do tend to think long form if I can. And I don't really know what makes a hit single. I suspect what makes a hit single is the conditions surrounding the recording, other than the writing. You have to have, for a hit single, a sufficiently young team who have a record company who are pulling out all the stops, who are right behind them. Then you have full license to go and write the kind of stuff that will thrill people of all ages. And in my whole time, 50 years plus in the music business, I've only really been involved with 3 hit singles. And one was with Genesis. It was I Know What I Like. The other one was a solo piece called 151, Cell 151 from Highly Strung. And the other one was when I was working with Steve Howe, and we had GTR, and we had a hit with When the Heart Rules the Mind. So I think those songs were written to order as singles. And that's quite rare for progressively minded musicians. It doesn't happen every day of the week, but when you've got somebody like Clive Davis behind you, as it was when we were doing a GTR, we were aware that we were in a position where if we did something that would be accepted by the media, by MTV at that time, we could perhaps upgrade ourselves from being something that was merely progressive, and we could run with the ball with that. And I think it was a song I was very proud of. We wrote together, and I re-recorded it in recent years, not just with Steve Howe, but with Steve Rothery of Marillion, and I think that it came out very well indeed. And I'm often thinking that it was put on a box set, and probably all those people who didn't go out and buy the box set may have missed it on its revisit. So maybe at some point it should be included on something that's a more digestible thing. In other words, something where you're not forking out all that money for a box set. But I was very proud of it anyway. I thought it had a great sound. It could probably be upgraded still now.
Was there any song in the Genesis discography that surprised you at how well it did?
Well, I was surprised that I Know What I Like did as well as it did, because I used to joke about it being our hit single. I joked about it, I think, to enough DJs that they thought I was being serious. And then, lo and behold, the joke stuck, and it became a hit.
Is there a Genesis album that you feel has stood the test of time best?
Well, I suspect that's probably Foxtrot because of the breadth of the writing. I know that one night I was heading into a club, and I used to know the guy on the door, and he always had music playing, and I heard something, and I said, "Oh, that sounds interesting. Who's that?" He said, "You're joking, aren't you? That's you guys." And it was a section out of Can Utility, the last song on the first side, as it was, of Foxtrot, and it was a song I'd written and spearheaded, and I didn't recognize it at all. I just wandered in and I heard it in the distance, and I thought, "Oh, that sounds good. They kind of sound symphonic, these guys." Again, Mellotron, that thing, orchestra and band, and that was always the idea of two separate schools of thought. The instinctive, untrained musicians working with trained, and the score sheet meets the riff, and all of that, improvisation, all of those different things that are kind of contradictory, coming together, fusing together. Because I always loved the term fusion, but that was reserved specifically for jazz rock at a certain point in time. But I always loved the idea of the terminology. And I used to use the word collision for that, different worlds colliding. And I like that, when you get two things together that really shouldn't belong. And perhaps orchestras should never work with bands, and bands should never work with orchestras. But when they do, you get something really wonderful. Incidentally, I heard some stuff recently that Neil Young had done with orchestra and big band, and I thought, yeah, great. Back to the heady days of Man Needs a Maid. Always thought that worked very, very well.
I'm sitting here now trying to think of Rust Never Sleeps with an orchestra. So is there a Genesis song you think that stood the test of time the best?
Well, my favorite Genesis tune of all time is Dancing with the Moonlit Night, because I think that it goes through so many changes, from a cappella plain song at the beginning through to something that's Elgarian, and then something that one could only describe as fusion, but with a nod to Mozart in places. And I don't think anyone has ever written anything quite like that. And I think it's full testament to Phil Collins' drumming, that he was able to take everyone's ideas and fuse them all together and make it swing, because there are moments where almost every bar changes, and there's a change of gear going on the whole time. So it's absolute changes of scene that are going on all the time. And I think it's very difficult to make that sort of thing work. I think a lot of the time, drummers that deal with that sort of stuff tend to make it sound staccato. But then I think because he had the Buddy Rich influence, in other words, a sophisticated swing, he was able to bring the use of accents and syncopation to Genesis, which was, at that time largely based on classical music, and made it work very, very well.